Okay, good morning everyone, from one Paul to another. So my name is Paul Wedgewood. I'm from the Carbon Trust, based here in Edinburgh, part of a global organisation, but headquartered out of London. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Carbon Trust, just for those of you who aren't familiar with us or haven't engaged with us for a period of time. I'm going to talk about low carbon cities and putting that into some context, relating hopefully to the previous two speakers and also to Glasgow that's coming after me. Really to bring it back specifically to the low carbon agenda and how as cities that can be pursued, embracing smart city technology, but also recognising some of the other challenges. Look at the public sector role for leadership in that agenda, developing a citywide carbon plan. What's the framework in which you grapple with some of these enormously exciting opportunities, but also highly complex challenges? And very briefly, just to touch upon some examples from our work in the UK and further afield, as we're now increasingly working outside the UK. So yeah, just very quickly about the Carbon Trust. We're a not-for-profit organisation. We have the mission to accelerate the move to a low-carbon sustainable economy. Traditionally, that was based out of the UK, having been set up 13 years ago by the UK government. We're now increasingly focused on a global scale. We help governments, we help public authorities, we help private sector businesses in that journey towards a low carbon economy, and to identify their opportunities and challenges, but also to help to identify revenue and profitable opportunities that will come with the low carbon economy, be that in the UK or globally. So we help and advise, we measure and certify, we have a whole division that works on certification, and we help the development and deployment of new low-carbon technologies. For example, my colleagues in the office in Edinburgh who work around wave and tidal technologies here in Scotland. So yeah, as I said, independent and not for dividend is technically the correct phrase. Since 2001, there's 160 of us, mostly based out of our office in London, but we have an office here in Edinburgh, Cardiff, Belfast, and also internationally, Mexico, China, US, South Africa. Some context for low carbon cities. We've heard a lot of big numbers around cities. I've got a few more just to bombard you further. In 1950, the urban population on this planet was something in the region of 750 million, probably not even quite that. Now it's 4 billion. So in the space of that 50, 60 years, there's been a massive increase. So 53%, the UN estimates, 53% of the world's population lives in urban areas. That's estimated that by 2050 will grow to 6.3 billion, so half as much again. 3/4 of the global population then will be in cities by 2050. And of course, it'll be no surprise to understand that that growth is predominantly happening in the rapidly industrializing and developing nations, although we are seeing in certain of our cities in the UK increasing population growth, has already been mentioned. We've seen some amazing images of China. In China, the population growth in cities is equivalent to the size of London every 6 months. These numbers are just staggering. You can't quite relate to them. Where does that relate back to climate change? The IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, most recent report, end of 2014, showed that urban areas consume between 67 and 76% of global energy. That's about 3/4 of global carbon emissions attributable to urban centres. And in fact, they made a statement in that report, the fifth assessment report, that said the greatest potential for mitigating emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, may lie in the rapidly developing cities of the industrialising countries. So whilst we're here to talk about low carbon Scotland, there is clearly a story that we need to take what we're learning and help those developing nations, whilst at the same time learning from some of the things that are happening in other countries. And we've already talked about on the European scale how those international partnerships and learning relationships occur. So as I said, I will touch a little bit on some of our work internationally. We also talked a lot about smart cities already in the last two speakers. How do we relate that back to low carbon? Well, there's a number of obvious ways, but there's also a lot of probably hype, it's fair to say, around smart cities and data and big data. And some of that is because of the sheer scale of it, and it is very exciting, and there are some real opportunities. 1.5 connected devices for every person on the planet, I think, is the latest estimate. So 10 billion internet-connected devices. But all that data isn't necessarily available to us, and some of the most important data, as I know they found in Glasgow and elsewhere, around energy in particular, which has the most strongest relation to carbon emissions, isn't always available because of commercial confidentiality reasons in the marketplace, because of privacy issues for domestic householders. So there are a number of challenges, and we mustn't get into a way of thinking that says, oh, all the data's there and everything's fantastic and we can just grab it and do what we need to with it. There are a number of challenges. But we are moving into a world potentially where we are talking about the internet, not just of things, but of everything, where we can start to integrate data, devices, people, processes. That's the vision. Okay, so where does public sector leadership fit into this and moving towards this thinking around a strategic framework? Well, we have a fairly simplistic way of looking at this at the Carbon Trust. We always try and boil things down to usually 5 steps, it seems like. I once got accused of being like Alcoholics Anonymous, in that everything was a step-by-step process, but it just helps you to get your head around some of these massively complex issues. So for city authorities, we see 5 steps. First and foremost is get your own house in order, and this is very often missed when there are big exciting projects to do on a citywide basis. When there are opportunities to do things on an international basis. If you haven't focused on, are we using our buildings in an efficient way? Have we got a fleet that is energy efficient? Have we looked at our street lighting? So the things that you actually own, your own assets, the things that you can influence directly, then how can you be a leader, and how can you bring in other partners, and how can you stand on a stage and say, yeah, we're going in this direction? Well, you've got a load of real estate of your own that you need to address first. Interestingly, some of the projects we've done internationally, we go and we find that there's some really exciting things happening, but there's some really decrepit in-house assets and real estate. So we're doing some help, particularly in Mexico at the moment, where there's some ambitious projects, but there's some very poor energy efficiency within the buildings that the people are sitting in planning those projects. Secondly, local authorities in particular are very large employers, and they have connections to other organisations, and they can influence their community through that, those touch points. So mobilise the entire community that sits within your organisation and close to it. Thirdly, you've got partners and suppliers as a major organisation. Collaborate with them, and it's great to hear the way Manchester and Siemens are speaking pretty much with one voice. Those kind of partnerships between public and private sector, between public and public sector, so across traditional boundaries of silos of, well, we're the local authority and you're the NHS and you're the university and never the twain, are starting to fuzz a little bit, and we're getting some great collaborative and cooperative behaviour. Local authorities, city authorities have a unique opportunity to lead. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And we provide a lot of support to enable that kind of leadership. Again, we can look at something like the Manchester project you just heard a lot about, and that demonstrates how that unique power to convene that local authorities have is being utilised very powerfully. And then from there, as you just heard from Manchester, you're in a position where you can start to pioneer some major carbon reduction projects. But it starts from the top. You have to have your own house in order to be a credible leader. Okay. I'm not going to go through all of this. It was just really to illustrate there's a hell of a lot to do if you're sitting within a local authority, a city authority, and considering a strategic view on how you take your city forward as a low-carbon city. We clump it into 3 major areas when we look at these challenges. There's sustainability and strategy and governance. Often gets missed, actually. So how are you going to manage all these challenges? How are you going to mobilise the leadership so that it's maintained beyond the initial exciting 6 months, 12 months, first couple of years? How do you engage all the right organisations, all the right people? And how do you identify and prioritise the plans that you're going to lead with and the opportunities that come first? That relates onwards to measurement, reporting and verification, because if you can't quantify what you're planning to do and you can't quantify the relative opportunities, you can't make sensible, informed decisions, you can't build business cases, you can't attract partners in and attract investment. And thirdly, the whole economic planning and technology planning to lead to implementation requires a whole additional set of skills, particularly as we start to look at some of the technology-driven opportunities and the technical knowledge and understanding that's required in order to make those happen. So lots and lots to do, and if you're going to do those in a sensible way, you are going to need a strategic framework, which was the title of my presentation. So when we look at how you do that and how you develop citywide planning for carbon reduction, we very much espouse that you base what you do around the greenhouse gas protocol, and there is a particular subset of that around community scale greenhouse gas protocol that we recommend. We're also working with the World Bank to look at some of the tools and methodologies that they apply, and there's a lot of synergy. Again, it all comes back to the same root of the GHG protocol. Beyond that, city governments have policy levers, and the Committee on Climate Change referenced this in 2012. So it's about being in a position where you have a strategic view of how you're going to leverage those policy levers. So planning in particular is something that local authorities and city governments have a great deal of influence over, and we need to see that being leveraged around buildings, around energy supply, transport. Space and density is vitally influential towards low carbon cities. Even the extent to which you utilise Green Deal providers, and then of course issues like district heating, which are a whole topic in themselves and are now being covered a lot tomorrow in this conference. The other thing that local authorities can do particularly uniquely is around convening and bringing together the city partners, both public and private sector, community groups and representation. And they have the ability, perhaps uniquely amongst that community, of raising low-cost finance. Now, we know finance is a challenge in every sense, but public sector finance and local authority ability to borrow is unique compared to a number of other public sector partners. So that's a key reference point. Further than that, many, many touch points into other key assets and infrastructure. So whether that's housing, whether you are a social landlord in your own respect, or you have an oversight of all other social landlords, whether it's schools, whether it's your own procurement and the ability to buy in a more low carbon way and influence the entire market in the city. We've talked a lot about data, and I'm not going to try and go there because these guys know a whole lot more about it than I do, but city scale data and the ability again to be a coordinating point for that. The communication to a wide audience, be that your electorate and residents, be that your employees within a local authority, be it, again, the partners and suppliers that you work with. And the other thing that, of course, is a duty as well as an opportunity for local authorities is to take that strategic view on adaptation. So, yes, largely I'm talking here about mitigation being part of a low-carbon city, but adaptation is an area that, again, local government needs to take cognizance of. Building a master plan as a low-carbon city, we're starting to see them emerge. Birmingham, Copenhagen are two examples that I've just thrown up there, but it starts to include and document the governance structures, the stakeholder engagement and the approach that's being taken holistically across the city. Looking at the actual assets of buildings, transport, land use, how that's being planned, the vision for that. Actually starting to quantify, though, bringing in the greenhouse gas measurements, and it's not always easy because the data isn't always accessible and you have to make estimates and you have to beg, borrow, steal data, use benchmarks, but you have to start bringing that into now the master planning so that we can genuinely have an informed debate and start to prioritise around that quantification. From that, you can build smart targets and actually have a numerical vision of where you're trying to get to, quantified, relevant, achievable. And then starting to build the business cases for the benefit realisation and the financial business cases. I'm going to just rattle through some of these. Anybody who's worked with the Carbon Trust from the public sector will probably be familiar with this because all the public sector organisations in Scotland have a carbon management plan built around this 5-stage process. And I show it really just to show that we're not taking anybody to anywhere they've not previously been. It's a 5-stage process that then works at city level. So it's about mobilising the stakeholders, as I've talked about, conducting a statewide audit, which is where you start to bring in the quantification and building the baseline to understand the carbon emissions for the entire city, identifying the opportunities across the city, developing the strategy, and then ultimately the implementation and review as you implement. So sticking to this rather simplistic but very robust 5-step process that allows cities to pull together their efforts. I need to speed up now, but just quickly, so we can start to build an implementation plan that brings in all those elements. We have a carbon calculator that can help calculate the baseline, whether it's based upon real data drawn from all the different sources or whether you bring in benchmarks and estimations. But again, quantification being key and having a forecast that takes you forward 5, 10 years. What's the CO2 emissions of the city going to be? Where are they coming from and why? and then ultimately bringing in that whole policy document that represents a low carbon master plan for the entire city. Yeah, I'll just skip on. Some examples of where we're working. Oxford City Council, I'm actually going down straight after this on a train to another event we're running in London tomorrow where Oxford are speaking. They're a real success story. 25% carbon reduction target they set for themselves within their own asset base has been achieved and exceeded. They're now working very widely across the community in Oxford. They've set up 4 regional low carbon partnerships. They're starting to bring in finance that they're now lending to community groups to develop low carbon energy facilities. Bristol, we've worked with them for a number of years. As you're probably aware, they are 2015 European Green Energy Capital, and they are advancing on a number of fronts with major district energy propositions across a number of other initiatives that they're managing, again, because they've got a citywide framework and master plan in place. Warwick, a particular case where planning policy is being leveraged to influence private and public development, and again, it's that ability to mobilise utilising the City Council's unique powers. This is Mexico, as I already mentioned briefly in passing, and this is a project that we're running with 2 state governments in Jalisco, which is where the mega city of Guadalajara is, and also a smaller state called Tabasco in the south. And in Chile as well, where we're working with the city of, I never get the pronunciation right, Antofagasta, I think it's pronounced, looking at their strategic energy plan. Find out a little bit more. This is an emerging developing website, our Low Carbon Cities website, lowcarboncities.co.uk. You can register there and access some of the areas where we've got some of the case studies, and we'll be developing that over and over as time goes on. Thank you very much.